if you don't mind taking us through your journey a bit to get started and tell us a little bit about how it led to Founder Readiness Institute.
Absolutely. One of my favorite stories to tell recently. So I began my career at an environmental think tank actually, and then quickly moved into the investing world because I saw the power and potential of moving capital, being a person who deployed capital for good. Because I really believe that you can have investments that do good, but also that have a strong return. So I've spent my career exploring that intersection and primarily had been thinking about it from the perspective of natural capital, things like agriculture, forestry, climate oriented investments, positive climate oriented investments. And then along the way, after getting an MBA and starting another company, working for many teams and managers, I just saw a lot of leadership challenges, a lot of people who didn't have the capacity to really lead at the level they were leading, and a lot of team dysfunction that really led me to have the desire to start to tackle this other problem that I hadn't really been looking at. And so I went back to kind of an early interest in high school, which was psychoanalysis. Um, I haven't been formally trained as a therapist or psychoanalyst, but I've had a long standing interest in it in addition to leadership assessments. I find it fascinating to learn about yourself. And so I had this idea, can we bring leadership assessment tools in more into the financial services industry, since that's where I come from? And that's where I landed on this company. And my co-founder is an actual he's a psychoanalyst, therapist, and he has a data science and MBA background. So kind of together we felt like we could tackle this issue of people risk in within the investing world.
Very interesting. Well, that aligns very much with my interests, and the whole reason why I started the show actually is things of that nature. So really cool to talk with you. So when you talk about people and investing, like there's so much that goes into investing and so much that goes into things like leadership and development and all of that when it comes to the people side of the business. Like, how do they fit together in your mind? Like, what is the kind of thesis from that perspective?
Well, I think there's a couple different dimensions to it. In the earlier stages of investing, I think you're making a big bet on the people and the founding team. And so in many ways, I'm surprised that more rigor and analysis doesn't go into assessing the leadership from a capacity and developmental perspective. Some investors are doing it because I've talked to over 150 VCs at this point, and so some are, but I would say less than 10%. Most of the time, it's based decisions are made based on, I would call it, warm leads, reference checks, and gut feel. And so that's just how business is done right now. And then as you move later stage, I think you see, more of a focus on the actual operations and functionality of the business, which makes a lot of sense. But at the same time, you're looking at inflection points within what a leader can actually do at scale. So the person that maybe started the company might not be the right person developmentally for that next stage of scaling the company. So I think there's a lot of factors to consider. Those are just two of them in terms of thinking about people risk within a company setting.
Certainly, yeah. There's a whole lot of different angles to look at it when it comes to people risk, no doubt. Um, any stories that have come about through this journey that kind of stand out as either show what this business is all about or that have really kind of made you feel like this is the right mission at the right time, kind of thing.
Well, I think we're seeing a confluence of market factors and forces coming together, which are really exciting. What we have built would not have been possible without AI. And we're seeing AI being tremendously successful at analyzing the transcript data that we analyze for our clients and the dashboard outputs that people make decisions off of. And it's just really surprising in some ways to me that we that things have evolved so quickly and that we're able to, in many ways, have higher, how should I say this, repeat I'm trying to find the right term here, that if you assess a person twice with AI, you're going to get an 80% or more accuracy. And compared to what a human's doing, you're also getting kind of above 75 to 80% level of accuracy. But what's really interesting is that we're starting to see that AI is actually better at analyzing this transcript data than humans are in a more consistent way. And so we're getting to the point where we're going to probably see 90 plus percentage levels in terms of like if someone retakes the assessment or if we were to feed it, because we look at several different models and how it evaluates a specific person or team. So there's just a lot of amazing stuff that's happening with AI. And then I would say that, we're getting to the point where people are evaluating leaders in terms of how they can handle AI. And so there's this really interesting point that we're at where we don't know how it's all going to shake out with the job market. I think there's obviously a lot of disruption right now. The bottom's falling out in terms of junior professionals. We definitely know that. But there's going to be a need for people to stay within organizations and companies. But I think those who are selected to stay or who are promoted will likely be able to handle complexity. And that's something we are measuring essentially as someone's ability to handle complexity and pressure over time and their ability to grow into that. So I think our tools are more useful than ever in that way. And, again, the volume that we're able to run through our analysis, is really the cost reduction and the volume is just outstanding. And so there's just an opportunity now for more companies to use this than ever and to get embedded even into AI API systems as plugins and things like that. And so I think the traditional way that assessments are done are going to be disrupted fundamentally with AI. And so that's something that's really kind of an exciting confluence of factors that we're seeing.
Interesting. In my own experience, in just regular team calls or client calls, interviews, uh, it is really interesting how accurate AI can be with reading the room, essentially, right? And I'm
Hmm.
talking about remote calls, so the virtual room, right? But reading the candidate, the client, whoever may be there, the team, and assessing the feel, even the feeling of it, right? Not just the
The
actual
sentiment,
words
yeah.
said, yeah. And that was impressive compared to just you always hear about, well, it's the human component and all that, which it can read the human component quite well, depending on the technology. And I'm sure at this stage there's a lot of different aspects that go into that on the technology and yours compared to others and all that, right? But the ability to ask questions specific to that meeting or interview and get
Right.
outcomes out of it is just unreal. Um, it seems like most of the time as leaders we're not even like arguing with it. We're like, oh yeah, that's kind of how I was thinking of it, or it's interesting when it comes to when you were talking about the analysis. That all makes sense. Is part of it the predictive outcomes, especially when it comes to more of the investment world? Is that what is part of the whole story, or no?
Well, yeah, I'm glad you asked that. So, in finance, there's always a disclaimer in any investment group. It's like
Mm-hmm.
past performance does not equal future results, and you have to put it on every pitch deck and I don't
Mm-hmm.
know every legal document. So I think that we're basically making the same argument that past performance doesn't necessarily equal the ability to hold future complexity or to be able to operate under increasingly complex situations. And so someone might have been promoted or hired because of their resume, credentials, warm intros, or past performance in a role, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're developmentally ready for that next position. And so the breakdowns that we're seeing, and again, these are like high level statistics. So, and this comes from, CEB and Gardner leadership transition research, but as high as 40 to 50% of executives struggle in the first 18 months of a new role. That costs about 1.5 to 2x the salary cost if a failed transition occurs. And then, it takes the lag time before that actual cost shows up on the P&L. So you have this basically someone in a group or a company investing in a higher level executive, and the cost of that not working out is pretty high. And again, we can debate those ranges or the exact, base salary cost, but then we look at other things like the follow-on effects of a manager not being necessarily good at managing a team. That's just one dimension of what we measure. But if we look at that, there's like increasing turnover rates, dissatisfaction, engagement rate loss. Those all have impacts on the actual operations of the company. Missed execution risk in terms of like, meeting deadlines for the quarterly earnings. So I think that there's many ways you can tie these to material business impacts. And I don't think people have thought about the developmental capacity of an individual very much in assessments to date.
It makes sense. How can Founder Institute really view the future of investing? Like, how can you lead that effort? How can you drive that disruption or change?
Well, luckily, we just brought on a partner who's our founding advisor now. His name's Ashby Monk, and he works through KDX. He's a Stanford professor who runs the long-term research group, and he's also a partner at KDX, which invests in the future of investing. And so his mission is to disrupt the investment industry, to think more long-term, to think more about impact. So, I mean, that's a really great validation in our mind in terms of like our theory of change as a company. I come from impact investing, so obviously have that mission as well. I just think that by paying more attention to leadership risk, we can help improve team dynamics and leader outcomes. And so better people outcomes equals better impact outcomes, whatever slice of impact you're thinking about, climate, community, etc. I think that if we just had a better focus on functional team dynamics and leadership dynamics, we would have better outcomes. So that's the high level. I think more tactically, it's getting embedded into decision making systems, and then we're kind of figuring out what those are. It depends on the firm and the fund and how. I spoke a little bit about VCs. They tend to be a lot more informal. So it's just been a process of educating, and one simple way we can do that is when pitch calls are occurring, or interviews, if you will, we can embed certain questions and take that transcript data and evaluate prospective founders. So a lot of it is how you're embedding into people's current decision making systems and just showing that there's an opportunity to present this information while they're deciding, or like after they've made a promotional decision.
And how does this impact assessments? Because as I hear you talking about investments and founders and leaders, I also start thinking about assessments and what that looks like. Is your plan to get into that space at all, if you're able to touch on that, or is that completely a different kind of a different thing?
Well, there's so many of them, and I know you have some experience with assessment companies. I mean, the way I see it is most of the assessments I've taken personally or that I've seen on the market tend to be very skills focused or
Mm-hmm.
personality type focused. They're usually self-reported, and they're usually forced choice or multiple choice in some way. They usually produce a static report that isn't developmentally focused in the sense of like, here's how you grow, here's a roadmap for growth. And, I think that I'm not denigrating all of them. I think sometimes they serve particular roles. But what we're doing is bringing in a whole body of adult developmental research into evaluation. And so we can now take any unstructured transcript data. So someone doesn't have to sit down, number one, and take an assessment. We just take their conversational data they're
Mm-hmm.
already having. And we're creating a developmental roadmap. So here's your baseline. Here are three things you can do to improve your developmental score along 6 to 8 different pathways. and become a better leader. And so we're not just kind of giving you a PDF. And in terms of how people are assessed, I think it's really important to say that, we're not really, it's hard to game our system because A, people don't know what we're asking, and B, it's, even if they take our assessment, they're open-ended scenario-based questions, and those are harder to game than just a multiple choice or forced choice. So I think there's just a lot of ways that we're different.
Makes sense. As far as the tools, that seems very clear on where you're headed with it. When it comes to that output of the tool, right? You get that feedback, you get that analysis. That's all making sense. When it comes to like actual helping people change, whether that's coaching, whether that's giving leaders that roadmap, like you mentioned, what does that aftermath look like? Like we have the data, we have the information that we're looking at. Where do we go from there? Is that will your firm be involved in that aspect or no?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're looking to partner with some coaching platforms that are building AI enabled coaches. I think there's going to be a whole slurry of those coming out on the
Hmm.
market, and they can be programmed according to different people's coaching styles. So I actually just ran into a guy who wrote his PhD on coaching personas. And
Hmm.
so he found through his research that people respond to kind of seven different coaching types and so archetypes. And so wouldn't it be great if you could select based on how you learn and grow best, the style of coach that you best align with. And I think a lot of the AI coaching, just to back up a second, is going to be like a lower cost
Hmm.
option. I think, there's certainly always going to be a place for coaches, for human coaches, but it can be quite expensive. And so I think, depending on the company or individual's, financial situation, the AI coaches are just going to be a necessity. And but I think we can do a lot to program them to have like certain archetypes or personalities or presentation styles. So I think that's exciting. And then we're going to license we're going to get, develop a certification training, and then coaches who are already working out in the field can take our, certification, and then they'll be a licensed coach. And so we can deploy them onto projects and clients. So if we are working with a large PE firm and we need some coaches, those are the people that we will bring into the fold. So we think that having coaches is a critical part of this because developing yourself along these different pathways is can be challenging by yourself, and it usually requires some sort of intervention.
When it comes to leaders that struggle, that in your experience, whether that's inside an investment firm like a VC or otherwise, or inside a company making a product or software, is there any kind of through line that you've seen where leaders are really struggling with, like whether it's one aspect of the job, if it's that complexity you mentioned, or just managing people, like anything stand out as what is kind of the main point of struggle for a lot of leaders?
Well, I've said this before, but what I've seen most in the work that we've done is that if a leader isn't coachable, that's a really big roadblock to most of the other developments of the. I mean, we measure currently six core constructs. We can measure other things, but this is what we found to be the most directionally correlated in the research with positive startup outcomes. So that's why
Hmm.
we're measuring. So coachability, resilience under fire, purposeful agility, emotional IQ, team IQ, and strategic complexity. Those are all the things that we're measuring. And I can get into the definitions of those, but I think coachability is probably the most fundamental because if someone's more coachable, it means that they are able to see themselves more objectively and aren't just focused on the negative ego.
Hmm.
And so they're able to kind of see perspective and see more of a system when they're making decisions rather than being attached to their own identity. So we actually call it coachability and identity flexibility because in order to be in an innovation role, whether that's a startup or maybe entrepreneurial role in some
Hmm.
company, you really have to be flexible to respond to the market and to how the nature of the role is changing. And so if you're really wedded to your own perspective and you can't take in that outside feedback, it's very unlikely you're going to grow in other ways.
Makes sense. As far as the strategic complexity, if we could spend a moment on that, would love to hear a little bit more about your thoughts on how you are looking at that as an organization.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite dimensions of what we look at because, excuse me, um, dealing with that cold. So strategic complexity is basically the ability to hold many perspectives at once and be able to do that objectively. And so the way we think about it is like say first to eighth order perspective. And you could just say there's a range, there's more than that, but someone's able to speak from the perspective of themselves at the lowest level, and then they might be able to speak about them and some other person in the system, and then it goes kind of beyond that. They're actually talking about a framework that informed them, and then also another person, plus also a business, plus also another framework. And so they're referencing all of these different ways in which they're being informed by patterns and systems, and that's informing their decision making process. And so instead of being myopically focused on oneself, you and your first order perspective, there's like multiple perspectives in place. And so the way someone constructs sentences and tells stories and speaks about their past experiences can inform how their level of strategic complexity.
What is one thing you've changed your mind on over the span of your life or career?
One, well, I do very much believe in constant improvement. I mean that sincerely. I think that it makes life fun to be, your hypothesis to be proven untrue, or always kind of looking for ways to change my thinking. But I think one major thing that has shifted my perspective is just how often, especially early in my career, I came in kind of thinking I knew everything, in a way, like thinking
Hmm.
you can change the system more quickly, and that, why aren't people doing things in these new ways? And you just realize that it takes a lot to change the system. Like there's reasons that things have been done in the past, and I think without understanding where things have evolved from, it's difficult to make articulate suggestions about what to do next. And so I think spending more time studying the system up front is wise before you try to influence it. This came to my reality more in the investing world, because I wanted all the impact metrics stuff to be measured. I wanted impact to be measured within like traditional financial frameworks. And I was working at the Yale Investments office, and I don't know if this will mean much to this audience, but David Swenson was one of the premier alternative asset managers in the world. Arguably, he managed Yale's endowment, and I asked him. We were having a conversation about climate finance, and he was just like, the data is just not there in terms of ESG data. And this was about 10 years ago. And it was really hard for me to hear because that had kind of been the conclusion I'd come to looking at a lot of different data ESG frameworks. But anyway, my point is sometimes, I mean, he'd been around the investing world for a long time. It's not like he didn't want to potentially have positive impact with his investment strategy. He was just making the point, like, I've looked into the data and it's just not that rigorous. And
Hmm.
so it was just very deflating, but also really important to hear. And I think you just have to be open enough to recognize where things are and the reality of where things are if you want to change the system.
Thank you for sharing. What really gets you excited about your mission?
Well, the responses we've seen from people taking our assessment or getting analyzed through our system have been really remarkable. I've had every testimonials, everything from "this blew my mind" several times, to people just enthusiastically saying, I'm going to implement the findings from this immediately. And so I think anytime you can have a material impact on someone's life and they see themselves differently is just a win. And some really high level people have taken this at this point, and so including our founding advisor. And so I'm just really grateful to have taken a part in building something that actually feels accurate and that's advancing people's thinking about themselves.
Very cool. So what's next for Founder Readiness Institute? Like what can we expect over the rest of this year?
Well, we are continuing to build into the investment industry. So I think, we're really looking for a number of private equity partnerships and partnerships with pension funds, M&A, diligence groups. And so I think that to the degree that we can get started with some of those partnerships, that will be really exciting for us. I mean, we've made inroads, but we're really continue to advance those. And then we've built the tool, so it's ready to go, and it's been in operation for some time. But I think, yeah, continuing to get visibility and really having more people experience the accuracy and the depth of what we're offering with our tools. I mean, that's what we're after.
Makes sense. So anything that we should have talked about that we should touch on?
Well, I think that it's, you know, there's always kind of this question of why do we need more analysis on, leaders, and aren't there enough tools out there? People, different people ask those questions of like, do we really need more tools? Do we really need more analyses? Can't we just go with our instincts on people? And I would just say some of the numbers say otherwise. I'm really struck with a couple different statistics. One is 65% of companies, according to Harvard Business Review, don't or fail because of internal people dynamics. 70% of M&A deals fail because of some sort of internal team or culture issues. And so I would say that the business as usual approach is not working. I mean, it's working some, but wouldn't it be amazing if what if we could all just get along? But doesn't that mean that we all have to know ourselves better and kind of have a better understanding of how to get better? And I would just argue we haven't really had until now, not just with our tool, but with AI, the capability to analyze data at such a rapid rate that, like anything else, we can see patterns that maybe we couldn't see before. And so I would just urge people to think about the system differently and to see that there are always ways to do things better. And maybe we're at a time where we can improve some of those odds. So I'm really excited to be part of it.
Very cool. Logan, what would you like those you've worked with to say about your impact on them?
Um, I think that I was helpful in illuminating internal patterns that mattered to how they showed up as leaders.
And how can listeners best follow along with the mission?
Our website is founderready.io, and we also are on LinkedIn, Founder Readiness Institute. So we post quite often, and I always post podcasts and blogs and other materials that we're developing. And so our website and LinkedIn are probably the best ways to reach us.
Very good. Logan Yanoviak, Readiness Institute. Appreciate you being here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham.